Well, it looks like employees and potential employees are in the driver's seat in this job market. We've talked a lot about this trend, but do they have all the information they need when they're looking for a job? Because as we know, pay is only one slice of that picture. We are joined now by Mary Childs. She is the co-host of NPR's Planet Money and also the co-author of a new report on Quartz.com that looks at benefits among financial firms. And Mary, I want to start out by, you talked about on Twitter how you came to do this report in the first place. And I actually want to start there because I think it's really important, the sort of context for why you decided to look into this data. So if you don't mind, tell us sort of how this report came about.
Sure. It was quite a journey. So I basically had dinner with some friends 2.5, almost 3 years ago. And, 4 women having dinner talking about, a lot of them were considering having a baby and they all worked in finance. I'm a journalist. I kind of, cover finance. But the 3 women that I was having dinner with, none of them could quite parse what their benefits policies were. They couldn't figure out what their parental leave policies would be. So one of them, literally the only copy of the benefits was in like a physical binder in a desk drawer in the HR person's area, and she had to rummage through their stuff to find out. And they didn't really have a policy for someone like her who was considering surrogacy. And then another one ended up having to kind of bilaterally negotiate her leave with her boss. I think she was the second person in her firm's 30 or 40 year history to take maternity leave, which I personally object to saying maternity. I have a whole thing that I can evangelize about later. But basically they just were discussing the degree to which they have no clue what they were offered. And finding out was really difficult. And so that to me was just wait, why is this so hard? Aren't we supposed to think about benefits as this competitive advantage? Isn't this supposed to be a way that we, attract and retain talent as, this very wealthy industry in a very wealthy country? And yet, if you bring it up in your you only find out late stage in the negotiations for a new job when you've, you're really close to already signing and you're oh, by the way, do you mind letting me know what kind of parental leave you have? And then you've flagged to everyone that you might have a baby, which people love. So it just becomes this whole spiral of difficulty. And I just kind of thought why don't we have this transparency? Why isn't this on Glassdoor or something? And then I decided somewhat cavalierly that I would just go apply that transparency myself. I'm a journalist, I can just go ask. And that was far more work than I expected, but we ended up canvassing 101 different financial firms just trying to ask for their policies. And we got 32 responses, which was far higher than I expected at first, frankly. At first I thought I would get a lot. And then as I started getting all this weird friction from the PR people that represent these firms, they're wait, why? Why do you need this information? How's it going to be used? There are regulatory reasons why we can't. There are compliance reasons why we can't. And I'd be what are those reasons? They'd be sorry, I misspoke. It doesn't seem, there are regional differences for sure.
They just didn't want to tell you. That was the reason.
They didn't want to tell me.
Go away, Mary.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
exactly.
No, but that to me is so fascinating because you see stories all the time. There was a story last week, Goldman Sachs going to raise the pay for junior bankers. They have no problem with that stuff getting out there, right? So that is fascinating to me. And I actually, you were surprised at how many responses you get, but I was actually kind of surprised at how few companies responded to you. That they weren't willing to be more transparent about this. To me, does it read tone deaf in this environment where it's really hard to find people and they are saying to you very loud and clearly that this stuff is important to them?
Completely. And I think you're exactly right. It was such a dental appointment getting all this data from the firms. They would not, I had to be on calls with hundreds of different PR people trying to just handhold to get the data. And once we started to get it, you'll see in the types of firms that did end up disclosing, Point 72 was one of the ones that was very happy that, Steve Cohen's firm, and they say that they compete with tech firms. And so, you look kind of across the way at technology firms that have ping pong in the office or whatever, and they are accustomed to some extent to touting their benefits, but it's always the silly stuff like beanbag chairs or something. And you're no, I want to know if my medical premia are covered.
And Mary, historically, there's been a lot of focus on Bridgewater's culture. Ray Dalio, principals, clearly he runs the shop like a different type of company. What did you find here from a Bridgewater perspective?
Bridgewater's were actually very compelling. They have a policy where you have to take 15 days of vacation per year, which, like, as a person who compulsively does not take vacation, I'm not a role model here, like, absolutely would love for someone to force me to take vacation. And that's obviously increasingly critical as we as a society talk about burnout, and everyone, working from home has blurred the boundaries of work and the rest of their lives. They also have a policy where they have 6 Bridgewater-wide holidays, and they are attached to weekends. So what ends up happening is, like in normal cultures, if you take a vacation, your team might suffer. You might come back to the office and everyone's like, oh, thank God you're here. We couldn't do XYZ. We needed you. And so you're kind of on vacation, like checking your email, making sure no one's like in pain because you went on vacation. These 6 Bridgewater-wide holidays mean that you end up not hurting your team. Everyone is off. So no one's going to be like, oh, that guy, he's talking about vacation. So I feel like that's actually like, for all the interesting Bridgewater culture. And like, I should note that I can't speak to how these are implemented. They mandate the 15-day vacation policy, but otherwise it gets very hard to say, oh, XYZ firm has fantastic parental leave. Like, do people actually take it? I don't know. And to report that out would be like incredibly difficult, to the point of probably impossible. But I was kind of pleasantly surprised by what Bridgewater offered, for sure.
Well, and then there's the question of, if when you're not on vacation, are you working an 80-hour week, right? I mean,
right.
That I guess is the other part of the equation. I am curious what you found on, let's call it parental leave, right? On that front, and not just traditional parental leave, but you also dug into things like adoption and surrogacy. What did you find on that front?
Yeah, it varied pretty widely. I think firms are kind of waking up. One of the things that I found really interesting was the language that people use. I mentioned that I evangelize about saying parental leave instead of maternity versus paternity, because, if we stop making that delineation, we are going to close off this like huge liability where, if you specify your policy by gender, I just don't understand why you would do that, because like you're just opening yourself up for a lawsuit, in my view. JP Morgan literally had a big settlement a couple of years ago over primary versus secondary caregiver. So I think the language that firms use is definitely, in flux right now. People are trying to figure out, HR is clearly trying to figure out across the board what the right terminology is to use and what the right policies are. But some of the firms, Goldman and UBS, I can highlight, have gender neutral and kind of caregiver status neutral leave policies, which is to say, if you are the primary parent or the secondary parent, which, we can dig into that another day, you get the same amount of weeks. You get 20 weeks off. And that is, I think, so, I just had a baby, and it was absolutely bananas to me that, my husband is self-employed. So he was able to work with me and help me with the baby. And I was like, at week like 18, I was like, wait, some people don't get this. Like, are you kidding me? So, not to be the kind of person who thinks that this should happen for everyone because I just experienced it, but also I did just experience it, and it was super acute. And I think the migration I think we're making really good headway societally on parental leave. The financial firms do lead the way in a lot of respects on that one. And we've seen really massive progress in the past 3 to 5 years.
We have. And as someone who has a lot more distance between myself and my own parental leave, I still feel very strongly that this is something, short of all of us moving to Scandinavia, that American companies and frankly, the American government really need to get on board with this. Mary, it's an awesome story, and everyone should go check it out on QZ.com. It's great to catch up with you, Mary Childs, NPR Planet Money co-host. Thank you so much.